showing some evidence of one of the caves that we'll go to being older, or at least concurrent with the uplift of the range. So tune in next month if you want a little more.
All right, I'm going to start off with the next section, and I am showing my screen. Hopefully that's coming up for all of you. So this is we're going to start off with the full schedule that we're going to do on May 10th for the Geological Society of America. We're just doing stops 5 and 6 tonight, so don't get worried. We won't keep you here for everything. But thank you for joining us for stop 6 about Lehman Caves. This part will take a little bit over an hour plus some question time, and we have multiple presenters to spice it up. My name is Gretchen Baker. I'm the ecologist and cave specialist at Great Basin National Park. And I don't speak geology, but I understand a little bit of it. So, but we do have some great cave geologists joining us, and that's Louise Hose and Harvey Duchesne. And we also have Zoe Havlina, a PhD student at New Mexico Tech, who is going to tell us about some of the geomicrobiology results she's found in the cave. Keeping an eye on the chat for us is Zoe right now. And then we'll also have Dan Jones joining us in just a little bit from New Mexico Tech and from the National Caves and Karst Research Institute. So let's grab our helmets and we're going to start into the cave. So as Dawn showed us, Lehman Caves is located in Great Basin National Park in East Central Nevada in the Southern Snake Range. Local tribes knew about the cave, but it didn't gain wide attention until rancher Absalom Lehman rediscovered it in 1885. Using a sledgehammer, Absalom Lehman broke past the first room and discovered a cave of many wonders. He started promoting the cave, making a trail, and giving tours in 1885. That makes Lehman Caves, which even though it has an S on the end, it's just a singular cave, but he wanted to make it sound grander, but it made the cave into Nevada's oldest show or tourist cave. In January 1922, President Warren B. Harding designated Lehman Caves National Monument. It was run at that time by the U.S. Forest Service, but in 1933, the National Park Service took over. In 1986, when Great Basin National Park was formed, Lehman Caves National Monument was incorporated into it. Tourists come from all over the cave to see a beautifully decorated cave. Originally, they went out from behind the parking area, climbed up a hill, entered through a vertical entrance, and went down at first ladders and later staircases to get down into the main part of the cave. To make access easier, additional entrants were made later. Visitors enjoyed the beauty, and today, without COVID, about 33,000 visitors a year tour the cave. Even part of a movie called The Wizard of Mars, which is really a terrible movie, was made in the cave. Today, we won't quite go to Mars, but we will get to see more of the cave than the average tourist does. We have 15 stops throughout the cave. So we're going to begin in the entrance tunnel and go into the Gothic Palace, and then through the music room and tom-tom room and the bottom of the lodge room stairs. And then we're going to make a big jump to go into the talus room and the gypsum annex part of the cave. From there, we'll be going down the Royal Gorge and back onto the tourist trail in the Grand Palace. And then we'll follow this red line through the Rocky Road, inscription room, lodge room, and head out of the cave via the exit tunnel. So I've got my uniform on and I'm ready to lead you in the cave. So let's remember those cave rules. No touching, no eating. I will let you pretend to taste something though, and no spitting. And up here in the upper right-hand corner, we're going to start off with a little bit of the Lehman Caves virtual tour, part 1. This is the URL for it. And when we did our practice session on Friday, this worked, but if for some reason it doesn't, this is a great way you can do it. And you can just Google Lehman Caves virtual tour and it pops up too. So what we're going to do is start this virtual cave tour was basically filmed or photographed with laser, with LiDAR in February 2020. And we have this available on the Great Basin National Park YouTube channel. And I highly recommend watching it because the cave is lit up so well that you get to see it much better than you do during a regular cave tour. It has its own narration, but I'm going to give you some special narration as we go in on this special geology trip into the cave. And so we're starting off with the same map there that's giving you an overview. But what I want you to really think about as we go into the cave is take a big breath, take a deep breath. Do you smell that dank smell that you often smell when you start going into a cave? That's right, we are going underground. And once we get through this entrance tunnel, we'll be in the cave. This part of the cave was still blasted out. You can see the very angular rock, but before long, we'll be reaching little pockets of natural cave space, and we'll be seeing a more natural cave look. Are you cold? The cave temperature is a constant 52 degrees throughout the year. So it's actually a very pleasant climate to be in. And we like to go in the summer for a little natural air conditioning, and in the winter, it feels warmer than the outside where we'll have snow. Well, we visit the cave, but there are animals that live here, including bats. And you'll see little bat icons occasionally as we come into the cave or go through the cave. And that's where we have special call out videos on that YouTube channel where you can get even more information about the cave. So it's a very cool way that you can have a more interactive experience with the cave. We're coming almost right to under the natural entrance area. And occasionally on the left, we have some seasonal mirabolite. So this is where we don't usually tell people to eat anything, but if you want to do your taste test on that mirabolite, you can do that. Right. Other things that live in the cave besides bats are a variety of animals, and probably, well, one of my favorite is the Great Basin pseudoscorpion. And that Great Basin pseudoscorpion is the top of the food chain as far as cave invertebrates. It's got long pincers and it's named pseudoscorpion. It's related to scorpions, but doesn't have a stinging tail. Pseudo means false. But it does eat a lot of other things that live in the cave, like flies, beetles. It might even be able to snag some springtails. And even though it sounds a little bit fierce, it's really tiny. So whenever we do see a pseudoscorpion, we feel very lucky. We are now entering the Gothic Palace, and this is the first large room in Lehman Caves. So I'm going to give you a moment just to kind of look at it and absorb what you're seeing. So this Gothic Palace is certainly looking a lot different than that entrance tunnel. It is filled with speleothems, and there's just decorations all over. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of cave geology. Now, I'm an ecologist, not a geologist, so I'm going to greatly simplify this. For our GSA audience, maybe that's not so necessary, but for just kind of fun and to make sure we're all in the same spot, it might be helpful. So we've got 4 main phases that we're going to be looking at. The rock forming phase is number 1. Number 2 is the dissolution phase. 3, the decoration phase, and 4, the corrosion phase. So in order to have the cave, we have to have the right rock. And this Pole Canyon limestone was formed approximately 515 million years ago down by the equator. It then shifted upwards to where it is now. And along the way, there was a lot of faulting in there. There was also some heat and pressure, dynamic metamorphism, and the limestone turned into marble in the area of the cave. Next came the dissolution phase. That dissolution occurred when warm acidic water came up from below and dissolved along those cracks, making passages. The cave has some mazy sections to it, similar to other hypogene caves. Eventually that water table lowered, and then we entered the decoration phase of the cave. Water trickled in from above from snowmelt and rainwater. As it went through the marble, it dissolved it away. And then as that water full of calcite came into the air-filled passage, it decorated it with all sorts of different speleothems. A speleothem is a Greek word. Speleo means cave and them means form. And so we have lots of speleothems throughout the cave. In fact, Louise keeps telling me that all those speleothems are just blocking out the rest of the cave, the real story. But they are really cool. And we can learn a lot about them. Like this little tiny soda straw that's growing at the bottom of that stalactite, That's what's grown in about 100 years from when the very first tourists broke off the bottom of that stalactite. So things grow fairly slowly in the cave. Our last phase is the corrosion phase due to condensation corrosion. And that we will be seeing areas farther along in the cave where we have elevated carbon dioxide levels that then corrode away not only the speleothems, but also the bedrock. And they leave very interesting forms. They even leave soft rock in places. And so we have some places in the cave that are getting bigger again. So it's that's our quick overview. We've got the rock forming stage, the dissolution stage, decoration phase, and then the corrosion phase. Okay, we are now heading deeper into the cave. We've gone past that Gothic palace into the rose trellis. Then we're going through the wedding chapel part of the cave. And we are gonna, this is really cool. The snake range cave millipede is another one of the critters that lives in the cave. And it's so cool because it's white. It doesn't need any pigment to protect it from the sunlight. It's been in the cave so long. It doesn't have eyes because the cave is naturally dark. And so it doesn't need to see. Instead, its appendages have gotten slightly longer. And so these adaptations have made it be able to survive for a very long time in the cave. And the metabolism of cave organisms even changes and slows down so they can survive better. Right now, we're getting into where we can see a pack rat midden or wood rat midden, and they haven't really changed from their surface form. They follow their urine trail to find their way through the cave. So it's very cool. We took a little jump here and we're seeing the tom-tom room with numerous cave shields. We'll get back into cave shields a little later in the presentation. They're one of the things that's really highlighted in Lehman Cave. And we take great pride in the cave shields that we have in Lehman Cave. So we're going to be going down these stairs and you see just lots of decorations all through this passageway. It's such a beautiful cave to go through because you are right there, right next to these beautiful speleothems. And you're going to go right next to something else that is really cool. And I'm going to turn it over to Louise Hose to tell you more about the next cool feature we have in the cave. So, and just, oh, oops, there we go.
So as we leave the tom-tom room, we can clearly see the marble on the wall. So while this is the Pole Canyon limestone, in the cave area, it's actually a marble. And if you look closely, it is a myelinitic marble, which means it has been metamorphosed by shearing events along more than the heat, but by actual shearing. And the foliation in the cave is typically near vertical. Are we on the next one? Oh, sorry. Also, watch the walls as we're walking through here. You will note features on the bedrock that look like cave scallops, and cavers typically know what these cave scallops are. They are asymmetric cuspid depressions in the bedrock that are formed by flowing water. The steep side represents upflow, and the more gentle side is a downflow into the cave scallop. And so all the scallops on a given wall will typically have that consistent asymmetric shape. They are also typically of a consistent size, but in layman, the scallops are neither. And so we have called them pseudoscallops, and we'll be seeing these features throughout the cave and talking a little more about them later on. This area, as we go just a little bit further, has lots of pseudoscallops. These scallops are some of the scallops, like the ones on the left, are calcite encrusted. The undulations, these sort of undulations, remind us of the kind of undulations we saw under the gypsum paste in active hypogenic sulfuric acid caves like Cueva de Villaluz, which we saw on the first part of this field trip. Punk rock, which is shown here, is a rock that has been corroded by acidic vapors and likely microbial activity in a subaerial or a dry environment. As we approach the stairs ahead of us, we will see many features that are interesting. First, notice that there is this massive white rock under the flowstone. Construction of the trail and stairs has really provided some excellent exposures. At one spot, there's what appears to be a breached drill hole into the white massive stuff. And that drill hole has also been lined by flowstone. So was there a time when there was water, acidic water dripping down and corroding a hole into this white massive stuff? Or was the white massive stuff at one time a soft sediment that was easily eroded by a neutral drip water? Notice also, kind of important to our story, is that the white massive stuff in this area has been undercut. It's just kind of hanging out there. I got an echo. Another clue that the massive white stuff may be a secondary soft sediment at one time are apparent slump features along the top of it, where the red arrow is pointing. SEM analysis of the massive white stuff found it to be dominantly fine-grained calcite with a small amount of silica or quartz. Two other features in this area are probably related to the massive white stuff. First, across the trail are 7 holes in a travertine slope. The deepest hole is an astonishing 42 centimeters deep. And these are natural. These are not, they sort of look like core holes, but they are not. Using a laser pointer, pointing it directly up shows that each of the holes is below a stalactite tip. Clearly, the stalactite stripped water that eroded or corroded holes into the underlying massive white stuff underneath the travertine. It seems unlikely that water dripping from calcite would have been acidic enough to corrode the holes into the travertine and into the sediments on the floor. So that suggests that originally, before the travertine was there, the sediments were soft enough to be mechanically eroded. Might the sediments have been hypogenic gypsum sediments like we saw in Glacier Bay and Lechuguilla, and we also saw in Carlsbad, Frasazi, and Villaluz? Another possibility may be that the massive sediments were calcite moon milk, which is a somewhat common cave deposit of fine carbonate crystal aggregate paste, generally thought to be biogenic. So as best we understand just this little area, obviously there was a cave, passageway, and the floor in the first stage of this development was massive, fine-grained, hypogenic, either gypsum or calcite moon milk, some sort of soft sediment that covered the floor. Dripping water, probably more or less neutral, drilled holes into the soft sediment, just as we see in a place like Glacier Bay. During the Pleistocene epoch, the water flow and seeping from the surface formed the travertine on the surface of the sediments and provided a travertine lining to the drill holes. That water would have also seeped in and cemented the underlying sediments. As it moved down, the water apparently removed some of the lower sediments, resulting in there being kind of a ledge sticking out. If the original sediments were hypogenic gypsum, the common ion effect converted the gypsum in the upper sediment column into fine-grained calcite and cemented it, forming the massive white stuff. If it was originally a calcite moon milk, it just cemented the moon milk in the upper part and eroded away, no longer carrying enough calcite to precipitate a cement. It eroded away what was underneath. And the result is what we see today. In addition, there are colloidal encrusted drip tubes on the slope with the 7 drip holes. And there are several more just north of the stairs. We'll talk about these features at a later stop. This is a place where it's a little confusing for those that haven't seen the earlier shows, because we talked about these in Lechuguilla and I think in Carlsbad, but hopefully you'll be able to catch up. Note again that the massive white stuff under the flowstone in the left-hand picture, it is there under the flowstone and over the marble bedrock.
Thanks, Louise. Now we're going to jump to the talus room, the largest room in the cave. In the photo, take a look at the people for scale. Although the map makes it look like the room is flat, it is not at all. It is an undulating form about the size of a football field, but you can't really see from one end to the other due to the piles of talus. Likely, most of these rocks fell when the water table dropped millions of years ago. The ceiling height in some places is about 15 meters high. As you look around, do you see many speleothems in this talus room section? Why not? Louise is here with a possible answer.
So once we left the paved trail north of what's called the inscription room, we entered a part of the cave that is overlain on the surface by a large fragment of quartzite, presumably the Prospect Mountain quartzite. It seems to be a metaquartzite, although the metamorphism is fairly low because we can see cross-bedded structures in it. Given the mylonitic nature of the marble, we interpret the quartzite as a fault block trapped during the Snake Range de Colomont that Don talked about during that event. And there are also small pods of sheared shale on the surface just west of the cave, probably Pioche shale. These impermeable cover rocks inhibited meteoric infiltration in the northwest part of the cave. And this area lacks or at least has very limited calcite speleothems that are displayed so spectacularly on along the tourist trails. But the good news is that it has also inhibited the post-tertiary alterations of the cave. In the gypsum annex, which we are about to enter, we find evidence of the original cave development processes, which have mostly been obliterated by the extensive calcite speleothem development in the tourist parts of the cave.
Okay, so we're going into the part of the cave that's been sheltered. And so we get to basically go back in time. Now, to get ready to go in the gypsum annex, we have to basically do a little bit more than just sit in our chairs. Going into the gypsum annex is not an easy endeavor. Only a few lucky people get to go in every few years, as it is such a sensitive part of the cave. You now get to be one of those people, and we need to get ready. We will have a hands and knee crawl, followed by a belly crawl, and then we need to grasp onto a cable ladder and descend about 5 meters. Okay, so get ready with me. Sit up tall, raise your arms, let's stretch to the side. This feels really good. It might look silly, but it sure feels good. We've been sitting here for an hour already. And do a little stretching. Stretch your arms behind you. Oh, doesn't that feel good? Yeah. Make sure you got your shoulders ready, because most of us probably haven't been doing a lot of crawling lately. And so you're going to need to loosen up. You might want to do some shoulder rolls. And you can see in these photos that, yeah, it's kind of an exposed climb down, but if you just take it one step at a time, you're going to make it just fine. Maintain your 3 points of contact as you go down the ladder. Okay, I hope you're loosened up and ready. We're going to join Harvey Duchesne and take the plunge into this rarely visited part of the cave.
That should be better. I hope. Well,
Yep, we hear you.
A short distance from the bottom of the drop, there's an oddly shaped stretch of passage. The lowest part of the passage is wider than the upper part, and the overhung walls display some very curious features. Next slide. This is an acid pool basin with all of the features we previously saw in Carlsbad, Lechuguilla, Villaluz, and Frasasi, except for the gypsum. Features displayed here are vertical rills, overhung basin walls, pseudoscallops, the pool water line, and the pool basin itself. Vertical channels or rills are present above the water line and above the pool basin. The rills are present above the overhung wall, and pseudoscallops pock the down-facing inclined surface immediately above the old pool level. Slightly below the pseudoscallops, there's an incised horizontal water line labeled pool level. The passage wall below the water line has no pseudoscallops, and the bottom of the pool basin is mostly smooth. There has been some more recent carbon dioxide condensation corrosion in the cave, and coralloids are present on the lower part of the wall, just above the old water line and in the pool basin itself. Late stage condensation corrosion and resultant calcite coralloid precipitation occurred after the pool basin was formed. This site likely records the position of the water table at the time the cave was being dissolved and is the best example of an ancient acid pool basin in Lehman Caves. Acid pool basins were first described by Donald G. Davis for occurrences in Lechuguilla Cave. There are places where gaseous H2S evolved into the atmosphere and then was absorbed into oxygenated microdroplets of water in the atmosphere and into films of oxygenated condensation water on the walls and the ceiling, where it was oxidized to sulfuric acid. The acid then reacted with the wall rock to form gypsum paste, as we saw in Villaluz and Frasasi. A feature that has not been identified in the gypsum annex is the feeder conduit for the hydrogen sulfide. Some Carlsbad and Lechuguilla acid pool basins have an enlarged vertical fracture in the floor, and subterranean sulfidic springs are in Villaluz and in Frasasi, but no such feature has been yet identified in Lehman. The marble of the Pole Canyon is intensely fractured, suggesting that perhaps the hydrogen sulfide could have risen to the water table along multiple fractures rather than along one primary vent. A little bit farther along the gypsum annex passage, we reach a point where the passage is constricted. That is, it's got a lower ceiling and the walls are somewhat narrower. It is the sort of place where moving air would increase in velocity due to the Venturi effect. Prominent features are wall crusts, bare rock and encrusted roof pendants, stalactites, trays, and hollow calcite encrusted drip tubes. Some of the bare rock low points in the ceiling are short, projecting down 10 to 15 centimeters below the ceilings. Others and stalactites are enlarged downward due to incrustation by botryoidal calcite. Botryoidal means sort of shaped like grapes. At the bottom of the stalactites are trays similar to those seen at stop 3.2 in Carlsbad and 4.8 in Lechuguilla. Next slide. The planar down-facing surfaces of many of these trays are tilted about 5 degrees from horizontal, but the planes do not all tilt in the same direction. The direction of tilt appears to be related to the length of the pendant, but it's unclear why the bottoms of the trays are inclined. In the Lechuguilla example at stop 4.7, trays are in close proximity to an underlying mass of speleogenetic gypsum. A cause and effect relationship between the massive gypsum deposits and the trays has not been firmly established, but the juxtaposition of massive precipitated gypsum and trays and lech suggests that the attitude of the top of the underlying mass of gypsum might have controlled the attitude of the associated tray. Nearby, in a small alcove near the constriction, there are colloidal deposits on the wall and the floor of the passage. Next. Closer inspection reveals that many of the colloid masses on the wall have flat lower surfaces. These are small trays. Similar trays were observed at stop 3 in the big room of Carlsbad Cavern. In general, trays are not common speleothems, but they are relatively common in Carlsbad and Lechuguilla, both of which are hypogene sulfuric acid caves. In the same area as the trays in the constriction area, there are several stalagmite-like hollow tubes encrusted with botryoidal calcite, ranging up to about 20 centimeters tall. Similar formations were described in Carlsbad Cavern and Lechuguilla and are regarded as possible indicators of the former presence of gypsum. Similar formations are distributed throughout the developed parts of Lehman Caves, but are partly covered by late-stage calcite flowstone. Okay, I think this goes to Zoe. I'm not positive.
No, it goes to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So walking through the gypsum annex reviews much of the evidence of the cave's hypogenic and probable sulfidic and carbonic acid origins. The cave walls are covered with calcite and gypsum crust, which you can see are partially detached from the wall. The floor is covered with debris of fallen crust. The relationship between the calcite crust and the gypsum crust is not clearly understood, but both could have originated during the earliest stages of speleogenesis by subaerial corrosion of carbonic and or sulfidic gases. Later deposits of gypsum flowers and aragonite crystals dot the walls. A rim floor vent, I guess the one place where we might see that there was rising vapors at least, we can find on the floor and see there on the left where the arrow is pointing. Mineral-rich water vapors rose through this hole in the floor and mixed with the cave atmosphere, causing minerals to precipitate around the rim of the hole. We also see abundant cupolas in the ceiling, which provide evidence of hypogenic origin. Cupolas are rounded solution pockets in cave ceilings. Most cupolas are interpreted as forming from hypogenic caves, either by slow-moving waters under phreatic conditions, or as we saw in Villaluz, in subaerial conditions by condensation corrosion. In a place like Lehman Caves, likely both mechanisms may have contributed to the abundant cupolas. Next. In several places in the gypsum annex and on the surface just west of the cave, dark brown and brownish black shale crops out which we believe is Pioche shale. Brown arrows point to the outcrops in the gypsumanics. The margins of the shale bodies are irregular and some are angular, as seen in the top mass on the right. These deposits are interesting because it looks injected into the fractured Pole Canyon marble. If this is the case, then these features may reflect conditions that existed when the rocks were buried at great depth and subject to high pressure and temperature long before the cave formed. Condensation corrosion has dramatically altered the surface of the calcite speleothem, ceilings, and bedrock. Preferential growth of cave popcorn reveals the airflow patterns since the original dripstone formed. The popcorn incrustations grew where moving water or moving air caused evaporation. Drying caused the calcium carbonate saturated waters to be wicked to the dry surface where it was deposited as popcorn and colloidal speleothems. The result is preferential popcorn growth on the upwind side of walls, pendants, and speleothems. Often the division between corrosive airflow and saturated airflow is vertical. One explanation is that the drier, warmer air flows along the higher part of the passage with water vapor condensing on the cooler rock and picking up carbon dioxide and corroding the bedrock. As a result, you get punked rock, which we see on the upper half of this passage. The corroded bedrock, or the cooler air, is calcium carbonate saturated and flows along the lower part of the passage, condensates, and precipitates cave popcorn and aragonite. Some researchers have observed that this pattern is most common in caves where circulating air is limited and there is little running water. It is also typical of hypogenic caves in dry climates, both active and inactive. Lehman matches these criteria perfectly.
Next to the marked trail, there's a white paste-like material beneath about a 1 millimeter thick crust. The crust was accidentally broken, but this turned out to be fortuitous, or we would not have been able to see the white paste. We believe that the white paste is a type of moon milk of presently unknown composition. Moon milk can be composed of calcite, hydromagnesite, or gypsum. The paste-like material in the gypsum annex effervesced in 10% HCl, indicating that it's carbonate. Moon milk is biogenic, forming by the direct precipitation of calcite or where microbial bodies provide nucleation points where calcite can crystallize. There are features elsewhere in Lehman that may have once been moist and active deposits of moon milk, such as at stop 6.3.
This is me, right? Yeah. Okay, so as we mentioned, the gypsum annex gets its name from the many white deposits that line the sides of this passage, and some of these deposits are gypsum. As you saw earlier in the stops in the active systems of Villaluz and Frisassi, sulfuric acid speleogenesis involves microbially mediated precipitation of microcrystalline gypsum deposits, which eventually form breakdown piles on the floors of the cave. We believe a similar mechanism may explain the deposits seen here. In my dissertation research, I'm exploring the geomicrobiology of both active systems such as Frisassi and inactive sulfidic cave systems. And in Lehman, I'm applying both the mineralogical and microbiological techniques to better understand both the past and modern processes that affect the cave. With these white deposits in the gypsum annex, I've characterized their composition with XRD, and I'm currently investigating the isotopic signatures of the associated sulfate, which may shed more light on the formational history of this passage. Next slide. So in addition to the white deposits that are found in the gypsum annex, we also see other sediments, including these black and brown corrosion residues pictured here. These loose residues coat the popcorn speleothems at the base of the walls in this far back portion of the gypsum annex and appear to have come down from above. Corrosion residues have a higher organic content than the other deposits in this area, and I'm exploring the microbial component of these residues with DNA sequencing and other molecular techniques. So one other interesting thing that we observe in this section of the gypsum annex is a few small areas with yellow minerals perched on top of the white floor crusts, as you can see in this upper right photo here. And these are under closer examination with a scanning electron microscope, or SEM. We have observed a platy hexagonal crystal nature, which you can see in the bottom left photo there. And that's usually attributed to the yellow uranium vanadium mineral known as meta-T-yamanite, or meta-T, which has been described in other hypogenic sulfuric acid caves. And so using electron dispersive spectroscopy, or ADS, both uranium and vanadium map to those crystal leaflets that you see there in the meta-T portions. And then in the XRD results, which I haven't shown here, the major peaks for meta-T are present in the diffractogram, and further suggest that we do actually see this mineral in just parts of the gypsum annex.
There are several desiccated stubby stalagmites in the northern part of the talus room. And so we have gone now from stop 8, which is at the north end of the gypsum annex, and come back out through the gypsum annex and back into the talus room, as shown on the map down on the lower right-hand side of this slide. These stalagmites, if that's what they are, have peculiar indentations centered in their tops. They're probably drill holes formed mechanically by dripping water. Lehman Caves has several sites where drill holes occur, including early stage coralloid encrusted drip tubes and holes mechanically drilled by dripping water. Although most are likely associated with dripping water, the mode of origin of the drip holes is not necessarily the same. In the case of the mechanically drilled holes, we have questions about the composition of the material containing the holes, as well as conditions about the acidity of the drip water. The holes at the, a little bit more on that last one. The holes on the tops of these stalagmites reveal a part of the internal structure of the mass. The material inside the mass is desiccated and in some cases has the appearance of a stack of slightly rumbled sheets of tissue paper or potato chips. The material is soft enough to be drilled through by the dripping water. At this time, we don't know how the stalagmitic features at this site were formed, but they could be desiccated deposits of moonmelt. The surface of some active Lehman Caves moonmelt deposits are covered by a thin, hard crust that resembles flowstone. The formations at this site and elsewhere in Lehman may have once been extensive moonmelt deposits, but more work is required in order to establish this notion as a fact.
So now we are moving over to the Royal Gorge, stop 10, which is a narrow, very high canyon. The Royal Gorge is under the impermeable quartzite layer cap on the surface, but it has more calcite speleothems than the gypsum annex. Perhaps the cap is more fractured or thinner in this over the Royal Gorge. However, it's kind of a transition in that we do see a lot of the original passage textures on display in the Royal Gorge. The passage follows what apparently is a major fracture or a small fault. And looking straight up, we see that there are numerous cupolas in the ceiling along this fracture. We also see depressions that look like pseudoscallops on the walls. Partially detached calcite crust coats most of the walls in the Royal Gorge, similar to what we saw in the gypsum annex. We can find in the gypsum or in the Royal Gorge, we can find bubble tracks and wall vents on display. The features formed during the phreatic stage of speleogenesis. These features are half tube and tubes in which thermal gas charged water rose up and out of the passage. Harvey's going to more fully explain them at an upcoming stop. Moon milk is locally preserved and exposed under the calcite crust, although no work has been done to analyze it beyond determining that it had a positive reaction to dilute hydrochloric acid.
Well, we've made our loop through the Talus Room and back to the Royal Gorge, and now we're going to climb up to the trail to the Sunken Garden and enter the Grand Palace. For tourists, this is often the highlight of the tour, and I'm going to show you part of that on the second part of the virtual tour of Lehman Caves. As we start watching this, we're going to be seeing the highly decorated Grand Palace. There are just speleothems everywhere, including cave shields and columns, draperies, and more. Although we are mostly focused on the hypogenic origins of the cave, we're going to digress just a little bit to talk about the speleothems in here, especially the cave shields. Cave shields overall are rare in caves, but in 2020, during an inventory of the cave, 504 cave shields were documented in Lehman Caves. And the parachute cave shield is one of the most famous ones found right in Lehman Caves in the Grand Palace. Cave shield formation is still puzzling. It's hypothesized that cave shields form along joints or cracks in the ceiling, wall, and floor of the cave through the process of capillary action. Calcite-rich water under hydrostatic pressure moves through the joints and cracks within the bedrock. As this water loses carbon dioxide to the cave chamber, it precipitates calcite on either side of the crack, creating an extension of the crack. This builds discs of concentrically layered calcite separated by a thin capillary-sized crack. The thin planar crack is referred to as a medial crack. The result is two thin calcite discs separated by a thin water-filled void. I kind of like to think of an Oreo cookie where you have the two plates and then inside, instead of the filling, you just have that crack. New shield growth occurs along the outer rim where carbon dioxide degasses and the seep water becomes supersaturated. Periods of increased water flow can inundate the capillary seepage, causing gravitational water to deposit secondary growths at the bottom and rim of the shield in the form of dripstone. So that's where you get the really pretty things that are dangling off the cave shields. Okay, so we are going to now take a break here and start heading towards the exit. We're going to go next through a passageway called, oops, before we do that, I'm going to show you cave turnip stalactites really quick. We have a lot of them in the Grand Palace, and turnip stalactites hang down like normal stalactites, but have a rounded bulbous form in the middle that make them greatly resemble the root vegetable turnips, hence the name. We aren't exactly sure how they form, but we have found that they tend to be associated with cave shields, and we never find just one. There's often a whole bunch of turnip stalactites all together. So we are still learning more. On the picture on the right, you can see how one has been corroded away, and you can see the inside of it that looks kind of like the layers of an onion. Now we're going to move into the Rocky Road, and this is Harvey.
Rocky Road's a great spot because it exhibits one of the best examples of a bubble trail that I've seen anywhere. Bubble trails are speleogenetic features that form when early stage cave passages are in the phreatic zone, or in other words, they're below the top of the water table. This photo shows a particularly well-developed example highlighted by the yellow line and an overhanging wall in the ceiling at Rocky Road. Beneath the water table, within a few meters below the air-water interface, carbon dioxide or perhaps hydrogen sulfide can come out of solution and form bubbles. These rise due to buoyancy. The bubbles rise until they encounter the hanging wall of a fissure or the overhung wall of a passage. Then they follow the wall upward until they reach the highest possible point, where they're either trapped in a downward facing dome or cupola, where the gas accumulates, or if there's no trapping point, the bubbles continue to rise to the water-air interface and disperse into the atmosphere. As acid dissolves the carbonate rock along the pass followed by the bubbles, leaving an incised trail in the bedrock. Bubble trails tell us that the passage was once submerged, but are not necessarily confirmation of a sulfuric acid speleogenetic origin.
Okay, now we're going to move a little bit farther down from the Rocky Road into the inscription room. And the inscription room is a place where when the early tourists came in, they had to go through a narrow passage called Fat Man's Misery, and they had to belly crawl through there. And a lot of them felt quite a sense of accomplishment when they made it through there. And they recorded that by marking their names or initials onto the ceiling. And so we have a lot of inscriptions on the ceiling in the inscription room. But we also have something else on the ceiling. You can notice those orange spots that are right over there. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those in depth right here with Zoe.
Yeah, so as Gretchen mentioned, unlike there's this growth that we see on the ceiling, and unlike the more untouched parts of the gypsum annex, which is very nutrient poor for microbial growth, what we think is happening here is that in these areas of the inscription room where people have been touching the ceilings, we get this discoloration from microbes that are living on the rock there. And as part of my research, I'm exploring what exactly the types of microbes are that we could attribute this coloring to.
Okay, thanks, Zoe.
So microbes readily exploit basically any potential source of nutrients in the otherwise energy poor cave environment. And another example of this you can see here in the lodge room. And this is a growth of something called lampan flora, and it's green. And so what you're actually seeing is photosynthetic growth, and it occurs in areas where lighting has been placed to illuminate parts of the cave. And this isn't specific just to Lehman Caves, but it happens in all sorts of what we call show caves worldwide. So any caves where we've put in lighting implements and other features to make it more accessible to visitors. And it's a really tricky problem to handle, because obviously this is an unnatural growth and causes quite a bit of discoloration. And we think it might actually degrade the speleothems that these biofilms grow on. And it's tricky to handle because we can't really use any harsh chemicals because it is a cave environment and it's very sensitive. And likewise, the formations that these lampan flora growths can occur on are also very fragile too. So just touching or trying to scrub them is a big problem for cave management.
It really is. We've had the lights off for most of the last year, and that has decreased the amount of lampan flora by quite a bit. So we're in the part 3 of the virtual cave tour, and this lodge room is a beautiful room to see a little bit more of that condensation corrosion because we have an intersection of passages right here. And so we have a little bit more airflow. And so we have, actually most of the ceiling has been corroded away. You can see too on the trail that it's a wide spot, and this lodge room was used for a lot of parties. And they would actually have people bring in their instruments, and they would set up a little band and have dances out here in the lodge room. So there were some definitely fun aspects to cave life. And this is the part of the cave where the Wizard of Mars was filmed. That most of the cave tour route is on the concrete, but right up here we can actually see some of the natural cave floor. And so that's kind of a fun part of the tour route that some people notice and some people don't.
I'm gonna interrupt here. We have a couple of questions in the comment section. So the first question is, are bulbous stalactites and turnip stalactites different? I'm not sure who that question is best answered by.
So the quick answer is yes, they're different. And Louise can probably jump in here with a little bit more because bulbous stalactites form underwater. Is that right?
Okay, yeah, Carol Hill was very adamant that these are different things. Bulbous stalactites, if I remember right, are the ones that were down, that hang down into pools, and they will be at the same level. So all of them will be more or less at the same level on the stalactites, where, or at least the top of it will be. Whereas the turnip stalactites are all sorts of different levels, and they seem to be related, as somebody, Gretchen, I think, said, they seem to be related to welts, which we haven't talked about, but this cave is full of welts, and shields. They're all just kind of the same sort of thing, growing out of fractures somehow. And the turnip, there's some turnip stalactites right there. They're very, very puzzling because they have these concentric layers on the inside. But yes, they are different.
Okay, and then we have a question which I think actually I can answer. So asking about what the different wavelength, if there are different wavelengths of light that we could use to control lamp and flora growth. So I actually did a study on that for my master's in Carlsbad. And we were looking at not the wavelength of light, but the color temperature of the lighting, with the idea that a lowered color temperature should hypothetically reduce the growth of lamp and flora. And we didn't find that it was able to do it to any extent that was really useful for remediation purposes. So it's part of the issue is that these are pretty complex biofilms. It's not just one organism that's living in them. And one thing that at least we saw in Carlsbad was a lot of what we call cyanobacteria. And so that's a type of photosynthetic bacteria. And those are particularly resilient organisms. And some of them are known to persist in periods of darkness for a long period of time. And so, even if we make changes to the lighting, there's the potential that without some other use of something else to get rid of the problem, that these biofilms could just persist.
And if I could interrupt also quickly, I had a question just sent to me, but I think it's worth mentioning, asking about the radon count in the cave with the uranium mineral in there. And Gretchen, do you want to talk about that?
The radon levels in the visitor center are higher than what we have in the cave. They're very low than Lehman Caves, fortunately.
Yeah, back in, I guess it was the 80s when the Park Service was doing kind of all of its caves, it actually, Lehman came out quite low, but I don't think they went into the gypsum annex. I don't know that would have mattered.
This Harvey, I'd like to also mention a question that was asked. Ron Bridgman commented that when he was working in the gypsum annex, he saw a lot of montmorillonite and wondered if it's still there.
I can say that I think that I found some in XRD. Yeah, I don't know if Louise has anything more to say.
haven't noted any in there. Doesn't mean it's not there.
Louise, you're kind of breaking up on my end.
Okay, I wasn't hearing anything from you. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. So the trench that was cut through this area as we move towards the exit tunnel was excavated through what is about a meter thick travertine layer down into the bedrock. One has to wonder if this section might inform our knowledge on paleoclimate in the area. The flowstone deposit must record an extensive Pleistocene history for the region. Elsewhere in the cave, stable isotopes have been used to inform our understanding of paleoclimate in the Great Basin and elsewhere throughout the world. Matt Lachmiet, is that how you say it, Gretchen? Lachmiet? Okay. The University of Nevada, Las Vegas has done uranium-238, 234 dating and has shown that the speleothems in the cave are up to at least 2.2 million years old. Along with other Nevada caves, he and his colleagues have provided insight into the timing and controls on climatic change over the last 175 years. So there's certainly more that can be learned, I'm sure, from the cave. There are several unconformities in this section, and they reveal some particularly interesting features. Stromatolite-like structures are exposed just below one of the travertine unconformities and add to the evidence that biomediation roles were important in the development of Lehman Caves. Stromatolites in dark cave zones have been confirmed within cave flowstone elsewhere in the world, but it seems to be a very rare feature. Arby?
Yes, near the top of the travertine deposits, there are several horizontal cavities that we believe were once for small pools. Shellstone has grown over the tops of these pools, eventually completely covering them. Attached to the roof over the pools are calcite crystals and features that look a lot like pool fingers. In caves of the Guadalupe Mountains, pool fingers are downward projecting elongate speleothems, commonly 15 to 20 centimeters long and about 1 centimeter in diameter. They're suspended from shelfstone deposits on the margins of pools. They form underwater, and they contain microscopic evidence of microbial involvement in their deposition. Some of the features in the cavities at this stop in Lehman may be pool fingers, but at this time, no work has been done to prove or disprove this interpretation.
So we are headed out of the cave now, leaving the beauty of it all. And there's some big takeaways we have here. One is that the hypogenic speleogenesis created a maze of passageways. The evidence in Lehman Caves includes bubble trails, cupolas, and metatee. Sulfuric acid speleogenesis resulted in hollow coralloid stalagmites, trays, gypsum crust, pseudoscallops, rills, and acid pool notches. The wet climate during the late Neogene and Pleistocene meant that we have abundant speleothems, and these have concealed what happened before during that hypogenic stage. And that low permeability capstone that occurs over part of the cave protects it from being decorated with things that then make it harder to find out what's going on. So we kind of have a best of both two worlds here in Lehman, where we have beautiful speleothems, but we also have these clues to this amazing past. Now, there are still many mysteries to figure out. And Louise, would you like to go, and Harvey and Zoe, would you like to go over some of these? Or folks can just read them. And then we're going to open this up to questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. And if you have ideas on any of these questions that we are pondering, let us know.
I think people can just read this, and this is obviously not a complete list. And I found it very interesting. Some of the, I think I'd like to see the, in the final one, maybe combining what Don had with this list, because he had some really interesting things that I'd never thought about as future potential dissertation topics and such.
Well, I'm going to stop sharing now, and then we'll be able to see each other in gallery view. And if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask, or you can type it in the chat and we will take a look at it there.
Well, while we're waiting, we didn't do acknowledgements, but I'd sure like to acknowledge some of the folks that have helped beyond the authors on here. We've got Tom Wilson and Dave Bonnell provided, and the park has been really wonderful in facilitating our work. And such an easy park to work with. And Zoe probably wants to acknowledge some people or some things.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to say thanks for everyone who's been helping me with this. As I mentioned, this is part of my dissertation work. So thanks to all the folks at the park who've been so great to work with. And to the Rocky Mountain Association of Geologists, gave me early on a memorial scholarship that funded one of my trips out to Lehman for sampling. So I'd like to thank them as well.
I got a question. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Back when I was a child, I went to the Oregon Caves. And in the Oregon Caves, they have an exit tunnel that they dug out. Well, the gentleman that was telling us about the caves, he was saying these stalactites takes millions of years to grow. But in the tunnel exit that they made in 1954, or whatever it was, there was a 6 to 8 inch stalactite. So it kind of disproves his age of the growing of stalactites. Do you guys have any more information on that?
I'd say in some places they can grow rapidly, and in some places it takes extremely long. It depends how the water is flowing and how much water there is, how much calcite's in the water. So it can really vary. And so the best way we know about finding it out is by doing the uranium thorium dating. And we have found all sorts of, or the researchers who have done it, which have actually been a fair number, have found all sorts of different ages in the cave. But the oldest stalagmite dated in Lehman Caves is 2.2 million years old.
Huh.
So, yeah.
Well, this was an exit tunnel in the Oregon Cave, and it was just a flat, straight tunnel. So there wasn't any water involved. No, who knows?
I think under the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., they have a lot of stalactites growing there too. It's not even a cave.
Those grow from mortar or concrete typically, but there's also the fact that that's made of marble.
Okay, I see a question from Dan Doctor. I may have missed it, but can you access any places where water occurs representing the local water table? In Lehman, no, but in other nearby caves, yes. And if not, how deep is the current water table relative to the cave? And I don't know the exact depth. I don't know if anyone here on this call might know it. I'd say it's probably at least 100 feet lower, but I'm not entirely sure.
I was going to say the same thing, Gretchen. It's about 100-foot difference if you assume Cave Springs is the local water table.
Okay. Thanks, Ben. Ben is the natural resource manager at Great Basin National Park, for those of you who don't know him. He has spent a lot of time in Lehman Caves also.
If you're not watching the chat, I posted my email if any of you would like to get a preprint copy of the chapter in the field guide for our field trip.
As long as we are acknowledging people that helped us out, I would like to acknowledge Donald Davis. He and I had some very extensive discussions, and in many cases, he opened my eyes significantly. In others, I think basically we agreed to disagree. But without Donald, I wouldn't be able to have made some of the comments that I made here today. He was tremendously helpful.
Thank you, Harvey. But I'd like to also make a couple of comments on things in this program. One is the horizontal passage that has the corroded ceiling and horizontally demarcated encrusted lower parts, in which it was said that the moisture moving through the lower part would be saturated with calcite, or excuse me, well, yeah, calcite. But I don't think that's a necessary assumption. I think that all you really need to see is the warmer, moisture air condensing along the ceiling, attacking the ceiling, and then rather than getting into the air itself, the calcite would seep downward and then redeposit in the drier airflow underneath. And another thing was the moon mill. In Colorado, we have a lot of active moon mill in the high elevation caves, and that seems to have a high component of monohydrocalcite, biologically mediated probably. Has that been considered in this case?
I'm waiting for Zoe to tell me.
Well, while we're waiting, if any work has been done, it's been done by Zoe. I can tell you that I have not done anything with it.
Sorry, I think my audio might have cut out for a second. What was can someone, what's the question?
The comment was that the stratified deposits in the passage where the ceiling was corroded and the floor area and walls were encrusted. That was thought to have been encrusted by air moving through that was actually saturated with calcite, but I doubt that happens. Probably, and there are lots of analogs in Lechuguilla and Carlsbad, and I think probably what happens is condensation from outgoing moist, less dense air, and then from incoming air along the floor, the dissolved condensate on the wall simply needs to seep downward without having to actually be in the air itself, but it would be redeposited then in that less humid lower part of the passage. And in Lechuguilla, the stratified line between them can be perfectly horizontal, even more strikingly, I think, than this one.
Yeah, that's certainly something to think about, and I'll have to yeah, I'll mull that one over. Thanks.
Rebecca Cambyses asked, does hypogene imply sulfuric acid speleogenesis flow? There are cases I'm sure
Louise, we can't hear what you're saying.
familiar with over in China that are high in sulfide, bring in
Maybe she spoke directly at the mic.
I think it's a bandwidth issue because her just frozen on my screen. So.
Yeah, I think we lost her entirely.
Harvey, would you like to take a stab at that? Pat Cambyses's question is,
I need to find it.
does hypogene imply strictly SAS, or could there be other modes of hypogenogenesis?
I would suspect that there could be other modes, but at this point, the only one that I'm familiar that's very extensive is hydrogen sulfide. The comment about the bubble trails that I made, I don't know that those are necessarily have to be made by hydrogen sulfide gas. I think that could be equally done by carbon dioxide, and in other carbon dioxide is actually a more likely mode for causing those things to happen than H2S. I don't think the bubble trails by themselves say one thing, you say anything positive or negative about a sulfuric acid hypogenic origin. And so, yes, I think that the caves in Glenwood are hypogenic, but I think that the primary gas there was probably carbon dioxide. There is a little hydrogen sulfide in the system, and I believe that at the latest stages of the cave, it left a sulfuric acid overprint. So I think in some cases, you may have one or the other, or some combination of both.
Harvey, if I remember right, I think Cave of the Winds, William Canyon area, I don't think there's ever been any evidence of sulfur in those caves but they are clearly hypogenic carbon dioxide caves.
That's correct.
I agree.
I see a question here that maybe Louise tried to answer, but she broke up. It says, can you speculate at all on the origin of the hydrogen sulfide? I know that the Chainman Shale nearby is a hydrocarbon source rock, but there has been regional volcanic activity too. And in there, what little I've read about the Carlin deposits up to the north, in the northeastern corner of Nevada, they are hydrogen sulfide related. And the gold is being carried up from depth and deposited as arsenopyrite and microscopic sized crystals within the carbonates that surround the Carlin deposits. So there's a suggestion there of hydrogen sulfide being, or sulfuric acid being, a component for that. And I've wondered, with no proof, whether or not that there could be an aura around the outside of these Carlin deposits that might provide hydrogen sulfide for the dissolution of caves away from the center where the gold is being deposited. The other comment is about volcanic activity. Absolutely, you do have that, and you've got a relatively thin crust riding over the Pacific Ocean crust out here. Volcanism is a result of that, and so you could have volcanic sourced hydrogen sulfide. At this point, for me anyway, I see a lot of things in Lehman and in the other caves that we have looked at in the area that suggest the possibility of hydrogen sulfide. At this point, I'm not sure we have a smoking gun. So part of the reason, at least from my perspective, for wanting to do this field trip is we're trolling, looking for people who might be able to provide us some clues as to what kinds of gases might have caused the speleogenesis that we're seeing at Lehman and elsewhere.
Is there a reason that you know of why there is not also hydrochloric acid or nitric acid karst?
I've never heard anybody discuss that, but in the case of the hydrochloric, I know of mineral deposits that have been impacted by hydrochloric acid, but they necessarily require a source of the chlorine. As far as the nitric, I haven't really, frankly, Donald, never even thought about it.
James Rice asks, Lehman Caves and Crystal Ball both seem to be hydrogen sulfide formed. Are many other Nevada caves formed that way? There are quite a few other Nevada caves that show some of the same features that we've seen in tonight's presentation. And that actually for the May 10th presentation and possibly our next Northern Nevada Grotto meeting, we're going to go into some of those other caves and talk about what features they have. And so folks can see that it's not isolated to just right here. There are quite a few other caves in the area that have similar features.
With great confidence that a very large percentage of Nevada caves are hypogenic.
Yeah, it's fun because in the park, just if we go
very few besides Lehman. I don't know. I'm not even sure.
So if we go about 2 miles away from Lehman Cave over to the Baker Creek system, we do have caves that have streams running through them. So we do have some epigenic caves right there. And we also have some more fault type caves up at our high elevations with big cracks that then widen slightly due to dissolution. So it's kind of fun to have all these different types of caves within a nearby area. And if we go about 100 miles to the east over near Delta and Fillmore, Utah, then we have lava tubes. So there's quite a variety of caves all in a small area. Well, it's getting late, so if there are any other questions, we encourage you to send us emails. And I think we're, if you need help finding it, we're in the members manual, or I'll just give off my email really quick to Gretchen_Baker@nps.gov, and I can help get your question to the right person. And thank you for attending tonight. And yes, Cave Valley Cave is a very interesting cave there too. I enjoy that one. That's my daughter's favorite cave because she can get so muddy. So
I would like to just acknowledge one more thing here, that I see a lot of faces of old friends that I haven't seen in a long time here tonight. And it's nice to see all of you.